Hello again. Today I just thought I'd show you a little portrait painting I want to do. I have my 9x12 canvas board here on the easel, and I have a sketched in for what I want to do with the portrait. I'm going to use some watercolor pencils to sketch that in. Normally I wouldn't add all these shaded details like I normally do, but I wanted to make sure that the sketch would show up on camera. And what these little areas of brown are on there is, as I was sketching it in, made some mistakes. Just dipped my finger in a little water, wiped along where I had the sketch on the canvas to erase it. And I use watercolor pencils specifically because since I'm painting with acrylics and they are a water-based paint, they will dissolve when you apply the wet paint to it. So part of the reason I normally don't go with as much color in the watercolor pencils is because that will affect the tint of your paint. But since this is a sepia toned painting where I'm only using brown, white, and black, that little bit of tint won't really affect the overall color temperature. So we're going to start. To start, I have the paints here on my palette paper. A lot of white because that'll be the one we use the most of. Some burnt sienna and some black. And we're going to go ahead and take our mister and just spray a little bit of water on there. Keep the paint from drying out. Spray a little more on the palette paper so when you're mixing the paints they don't dry out. Then we're going to come up here to the canvas. Just do a super light misting across. The reason we do that is since you have a little bit of water already on the canvas, the paints will glide easier, they won't break as much and leave the canvas showing through. Just makes it a little easier to work with. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is mix a color to paint in the background up here. So we're going to take just a little bit of the brown, that burnt sienna. I'm going to wipe off the rest on a towel. I use just an old bath towel. You can use paper towels. Get most of that off. Then we'll just cut in some white. Mix it up. And this is the reason we're going with a lot of white. Is because any kind of tint you get in there is going to really show through hard if you don't mix it well. So that looks like a good background color. So we're just going to go ahead. And if you go over the lines a little bit, that's fine. That's why we do the background first. So if we cover over our foreground objects, borders, we can just paint right back over it. And just take your 1-inch brush or whatever size, you can fill that in. And as you're putting it on there, you want to go over it quite a bit. So you don't really want a lot of those streaks to show through. If there's a little bit in the background, that's okay. Especially on a piece like this, that's an older one. Like I said, that's sort of sepia tone because it'll give your background a little more flavor, make it look a little more worn even. We're just going very lightly with the brush. Very lightly. Because that way if we do happen to brush over our outline, it's not going to pull it and mix it completely. Right. A little more paint on the brush. And this is acrylic, so it does dry quick. So if you feel like it's getting dry too quickly, just come over to your bucket where I have a little cup of water. Mix a little bit of that into the paint. Aren't going to dry very fast since it's not pulled flat. But once you pull it flat, that water that is in the paint evaporates pretty quickly. And just pull your brush over that a little bit more. Make sure you don't lift your brush in the middle of the canvas. Because a lot of times when you do, if you just stop and lift, sure, it's not going to do it now. But a lot of times if you do that, you'll get brush strokes or uneven color. So if you do have to lift before you get the edge of your canvas, kind of pull it in a sweeping motion. Don't stop and pull. Just lift it while the brush is in motion, and then just gives it a little more of a border in between your brush strokes to where it's not as noticeable. Color in there a little more by the young man's hair. And like I say, you know, I got some overlap on his shirt there. Not a big deal. We can paint over that. All right, gonna clean the brush. We're gonna swirl it in a cup of water in our bucket. Just kind of splatter the rest of it off. And like I said, I have an old towel here on my leg that I just wiped the color off of. You can give it a squeeze in the hand there if you want. All right. So the first thing we're gonna do all right. And you know what? We'll clean it one more time. And by doing all of that inside this bucket, I'm not spraying paint and water all over my apartment. I don't think my landlord would like me too much if I did that. All right. Now the first thing we're going to paint on the young man here is the eyes. And that's because they're kind of the furthest part of the main part of the face, they're sunken into the head a little bit, where the skin of the cheeks and the forehead are just a little bit closer. So if you happen to go over your borders on these eyes, it's easy to fix when you're painting in that part. So you get a very small, I believe it might even be a number 0 liner brush. And get a little touch of black paint on there. But we don't have to be pure black. So we're going to mix it in a little bit of the brown there. We want it to be dark, but not completely dark. I need a little more black, though that's a little overdone. There we go. Come up to the canvas and just start very gently on the outline on the top of the eye. Outline of the bottom isn't going to be as noticeable. Really want to do maybe a quarter of the eye. And come up here. Gonna do the same. Go ahead and get that little darkness there in the corner of the eye. Once we got that, get a little more paint on there. And we can start painting in the iris. When I'm painting in the iris, of course you always leave the little highlight playing in the eye. When I'm painting in the iris, especially on these black and white photographs, I like to go with pretty much the darker color of the pupil all the way around. Then to get some color in there, I I just take a little bit of the color you need and just touch it into the iris. I don't know how well that's going to show up on the camera because it's pretty dark. We don't want it to be that completely dark, so we're going to touch a little bit of the white into that brown. Lighten it a touch. And go back in. Add a little bit more. I want, these specks to be a little bit brighter. Not specks in the eye, but I want those highlights where the light is hitting the eye to be a little bit brighter. So we're going to go ahead. There we go. All right. Now, I think I'm going to fill in the ears because they're a little further away than the rest of the face. And I just like to paint my background in and then the furthest part of the foreground. Just because that's how your eye is going to see it in the real world. So we're going to take a little bit of that background color, but we're also going to brighten it up with some more white. A little more white. There we go. That brighter color is going to be for the ear that is more near to us. Go ahead and come in. You definitely want to paint over the outlines on the outside with this. Let's fill that in. And we're leaving a little bit of that watercolor in there for some guidelines, but we'll paint over that later. No big deal. All right, we'll get a little more of that brown mixed into that shadow color. And we're going to fill in the other ear now. All right. Now, that ear isn't going to remain that dark. Certain areas will, and certain areas will actually be brighter. I mean darker. Back, we're going to take that shadow color. We'll put that in now. A little bit of black, a little bit of that brown. And we're going to go in. Let's see. About right here, about right off the cheekbone. Darken that up. Again, with our liner, take some of that same shaded color. Come right up here. Gonna fill that in. Just using the liner because it gives me a little better control. Obviously, if I was using a bigger canvas, I'd use a bigger brush, but I'm doing these little tutorials for y'all. I like to use a slightly smaller canvas so I can finish before any of you are trying to stay awake while asleep. If you are using this to fall asleep, that's fine too. If I was worried about you staying awake, I don't think I'd talk so softly. Alright, now we're going to get that lighter color that we used. We're just going to add a few highlights here and there in this ear. Okay. Leave that as it is for now. You can always touch it up later. Now we're going to go ahead and add some of the sharper shadows onto this other ear. Big one right here, of course. Right here. And the other ones aren't quite as dark. Go ahead and come in here. Add a little more shade there. More right here. And if you can't tell, I'm being very gentle with the brush. Good rule of thumb with me. It's the softer I'm talking, painting is, softer the brush stroke. All right. Now we can come in here. If you ever get your handle dropped into your paint like I just did, make sure you clean it right away. Makes cleaning up yourself after the painting process a lot easier. Now we can come in here. Blocking in the main colors of the face. Be careful there around the eyes. You don't want to paint over those. And if a little bit of that colored pencil color shows through, that's fine. It's the same general tone and warmth of the paint we're using. Go ahead and paint over the teeth there a little bit. They're not going to be perfectly white. So it doesn't hurt to get a little bit of that color in there. All right. See, the skin tone matches the well-lit ear tone pretty well, so I think we're good there. I think, though, I'm going to come over here in the nose, try to cover up a little more of that watercolor pencil. And on the neck there. Like I said, this is our first coat of color. So you actually do want a little bit of that shining through. Okay, now clean the brush. And the first thing we're going to do is color in the shade along this side of the face. And we want it to be roughly the same as the ear. So I need a little lighter than that. There we go. That should be good. If it's not, we'll just cover it up. And the shade just starts, ooh, I got a little too much, you can see there when it's gloppy. Got too much paint on your brush, just wipe some of it onto your canvas paper. Heck, if you want, take your mister, get a little spray so it stays hydrated and you can reuse it. All right. It's still a little too dark. All right, there we go. That's a little brighter and a little better. I have a little reference photo that I'm using off screen. So when you see me down there tapping on something, I'm tapping on the dang Chromebook to try to wake it back up. If you have a lot of streaks in here, it's okay. All you gotta do, blend it as much as you can the first coat. You can always come back in and add a second coat once it's dried, and that'll get rid of most of that. Very, very occasionally you might need a third coat, but normally two will do just fine. Okay, we got a little more shade here where the eyebrow would be. This young man didn't have very noticeable eyebrows at this young age. Connect that a little bit. Now take a little more white. Lighten it up a little bit more because we have some areas that are still in shadow, but they're not quite as shadowed, not quite as dark. But you can run a little bit of that here, kind of on the border. Get a little transition area. More under the nose there. And again, if you paint over the outline of the mouth, big deal. You can always go back in there later. Touch it up. Now, since we have some of this slightly darker color, come over here on the other side of his head. And these outlines aren't nearly as dark. This should come out a little bit further. There we go. Okay. Clean this brush. Then take a little bit of that same color, but make sure you're pulling the brush flat. I'm just going to come in here and kind of cut in. Big old chubby cheeks. I do believe the young man in this photo was 7 years old when it was taken. 7 or 8. Some shade under the eyes we can add there. I think we got a little more under the nose we need to add. Right now I'm taking a little bit of lighter color again because I see some brush strokes. Oh, it's a little too dark. I need more white in there. I just see some brush strokes in the main skin tone I want to get rid of. I know I went over my shadow there a little bit, but it's an easy one. Okay, almost just kind of blotted in. Now, I feel like this cheek in my reference photo, that highlight color should come down a little more. I feel like I overdid it on the dark part, so we're just gonna get some of that in there, and then you know what? We're just gonna take some straight up white. That in there. Right now it's just kind of blending in. So paint's still a little damp, so we'll come back later to that and fix it. And since we have some white on our brush, we can brighten the face over here. A little more white on there, pull it flat. We'll come in on the ear. Add a little highlight on that side too. And we might as well add a little on the part of his neck that isn't in shadow. When you're working with acrylics, one thing that's good to do, if you notice any sharp edges that you don't want, fix them right away while the paint is still wet. It makes life a lot easier for you. Okay. Now we've got the baseline of the face painted in. Go ahead, grab our liner. Oh, got a little paint on our brush handle again. Oh, now that's clean. Grab the liner. Come in here in your black. A little bit of brown, a little more black. the other side, we want a little more brown mixed into that black. It's not as dark. Okay, we're gonna throw our brush around. Then, after I'm done with that, I'm gonna lighten up this little area where the eyebrow would be. It's a little too dark looking at it now, so. Way out on there, we can add just a little bit of a hint over this eye. And a little more shade right down here. A little more up here. Why not? Okay, now let's go ahead and get started on the hair. If you leave a little texture in your hair base coat, that's fine. In fact, you want to pull along pretty much to the flow of the hair. Now, I'm not using heavy body acrylics, so I don't have to worry too much about texture, but if you were painting with a heavy body, it would behoove you to make sure you're not getting texture where you don't want it. And I do like to use that heavy body acrylic when I'm doing landscapes, when I'm adding in the trees and the like. Just having that texture in there just gives it a little extra life, I feel like. Right, we got the high and tight part of the head that doesn't have the hair. Okay. Pull it flat. Adding a few little things. A little area of the background I didn't like too much, so I'm just gonna work on that a little bit, but that got too dark. So now I'm just going to go in here with some water on a brush and brush most of that right off. Now, I'd like to tell you I had that planned, but I didn't. I don't want to lie to you. So. But that looks better now, I feel like. Okay, now I did go a little further into the head I would like on this side. Hit some more white. Just pick up a touch of, just a touch of your brown from somewhere. You don't want a whole lot. Yeah, if you want your kid to look a little younger, well, just chubby up those cheeks a little bit. Clean that off. See if this is dry enough to add another layer to lighten it. Yep. Don't want it completely lightened, but a little lightened isn't going to hurt. Okay. Let's see how that. Hair should be dry enough to start adding a little more. Ooh, I know what I need to do first. Get a little of that highlight color. We need to go in over here. I'm going to round that off. And then again, we can come and touch that up a little bit later if we need. I think I am going to get some pure white, just about pure white. There's probably a little bit of brown left on the brush, but that's okay. A few more highlights on the side of the face. And you can use your fingers to blend, that's all right. There, that's better. So lightly, just right on the edges. Get a little highlight there. Little one coming on over here. And his hair coming down a little too far here, so we're just going to add right now just the white. So almost as a base coat over that hair. Then we'll come over with the skin color later and go over it again. I have a specific brush I use for adding highlights to the hair. It's one of these, I don't know what it's called. It's a flathead, just a foliage brush is what I call it, because it's also really good for painting in grass, bushes, distant trees, that sort of stuff. If you get too much, just clean the brush, then pull through it. And what I like about this one is that because it's not a straight edge on the brush, because the edge breaks, it kind of does the breaks for you in the hair. Come on here. Straight. Pull up. See that? Saves you a lot of time. You don't have to go through and do each pull of that separately. You can add some highlights as well if you want. then when you're done with that, go back to your little script bronze liner and get some whites. And what I like to do this when that shadow color is still wet, because get the thicker paint towards the bottom where the hair is thicker. Then it breaks and blends a little bit once you get towards the top, which is how the hair behaves too. A little more of that highlight in there. Need a little more on the other side too. Go back to this breaking brush. Yeah, that's a good word for it. Breaking brush. Maybe that's what I'll call it. Okay, get a nice little tone there. If you get too much off, you can just wipe it back on the palette or on your towel. And actually, I need a little bit lighter. There. A little more white. Definitely want it to stand out. Tap it off on your towel or paper towel. Then we want a little darker for the other side, of course. Get a little too dark like I did there. Just give the brush a quick clean. Get a little bit of a brighter color. Pull back over it. No. The face should be dry, so we can go and add in a little more detail to it. Finish shading under the eyes. A little more shade break over here. And yeah, a little bit of shade in the middle of his nose. Up here. Well, yeah, this needs to come out further. Shade there under the hair. I'm going to take now some white without completely cleaning the brush again, so we get a little bit of that brown still in there. You can come over here, play around with some highlights again. So you gotta remember, the highlights are just as important as the shadow. I'm going to go with the highlighter over here again. With the liner. We need a little more play in this area over here. Separate it from the little shortcut, the high and tight, as they call it in the Navy. Maybe that's more of a Marine Corps thing, I don't know. Okay. A little too much shade in there, but I just want to let that dry a little bit before we touch that up. I don't know about you, but I think our little man here needs little freckles. Man, a little too much time out in the sun, maybe. It happens, boys. Boys will do that. And girls, to be honest. Especially, ooh, that looks cute. That, you know, back in the 40s, when this photo was taken. Okay. I think I need this brush. And a little more shade right here. Kind of pulling up under that. There we go. A little bit right there by that. And just kind of, yeah, that might be. It's a little darker than our shade over on this side, which means we need to go in here and add a little more. Okay. Sorry I'm not talking too much. I just get into this sometimes. And obviously, this painting has been a little all over the place, bouncing from area to area. And I'm working with the acrylics. I kind of like to work with the areas that I know are dry, and then have areas that need to dry a little more. I try to leave them alone. And I'm sure as time goes on, I'll get better at explaining these things to you folks. Okay, let's see how you're doing. I am here. You should be good for some more highlights up here. Oh yeah. A little bit of a cowlick in there. Why not? Okay, let's see. What I'm gonna do now is go into my eyes over here and just do a little pull down. It's not necessarily squinting a little, but got that big old smile pushing his cheeks up. Yeah. I'll tell you what, I like that. I like just about every part of painting. But especially when it works the way you want it to. That is the best part. Alright. We need a little more white on there. I'm gonna add just a little more I'm brushing a little more of that highlight. And over here, it's not very even, so we're gonna work kind of almost like a wash. Okay. It's a little bit of that white, a little bit of that highlight, or that very bright contrasty brown, and we're just gonna come in here. Remember to pull your brush flat through that. And we're just gonna cut in a little slightly darker line on the bottom here. Not quite as dark as that brown, but still a little darker. Then we'll come over here, do the same. A little too much of that border of his face there, so and then if you feel it's too dark, just without cleaning the brush, start adding little touches of white, getting a little bit lighter. Okay. A little more brown in there. A little area right above this ear here that I want to add a little color to. Pull away from the edge a little bit, very lightly. That's a better color to go over that line, that jawline with. There we go. That makes that cheek look a little too chubby though, so shape that a little more. I think that'll work.